Hello, everyone. It's Pastor Bill here. We are launching new formats somewhat for these pre-recorded messages. We have returned, of course, to in-person worship Sunday mornings for a segment of us, and the rest of us are, of course, watching the live stream or perhaps the service after it occurs and is recorded and uploaded to YouTube. In any case, we want to continue to provide other messages, and typically we've released these messages midweek, but we've decided to change that, and now these messages will be uploaded on Sunday to kind of match our vespers service and to provide you the opportunity Sunday evening to congregate with your family and friends, perhaps to see these messages. But of course, you're free to see them in the middle of the week as well. So the pastors are going to talk about this opportunity in the coming week, and we're going to roll out a specific plan for the topics that we want to address in these messages. So this is kind of a bridge week, and Pastor Hilmer and Pastor Ian said I was free to speak on whatever I wanted to for this week. And so I thought I would talk about the discipline of not speaking. Now, you might say to yourself, oh, you're thinking about the discipline of silence. Well, actually, I'm not just thinking about silence. I'm thinking about not speaking. They are really two different disciplines because there are scenarios when there can be lots of noise, but you still must practice the discipline of not speaking. Now, I was reminded this morning of this particular discipline in my own daily Bible reading, with which some of you join for our midweek morning Zoom prayer time. And I read from Leviticus 10, and here's what it says. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So the fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Moses then said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke of when he said, among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all people, I will be honored. And then it says this, Aaron remained silent. His two sons had just been consumed by the Lord's fire for not respecting the Lord's holiness. Aaron must have been astonished. He must have been dumbfounded. And I suspect here that he is in some way consenting to what the Lord has done, but he has been humbled. And so it says, Aaron remained silent. I began to ask myself the question, when do I ever remain silent? When do you remain silent? When are we called not to speak? Those of you who know me know I like to talk, and it's very easy for me to monopolize a conversation. I'm not particularly proud of that. I want to work on becoming a different person. I think we sometimes talk out of turn, or we talk too much for any number of reasons, many of which are not particularly healthy. Perhaps we are uncertain. Perhaps we want to control the conversation. Perhaps we're fearful. Perhaps we're anxious. There can be any number of reasons why we talk and talk a lot. And I think we need to reflect on whether we talk too much and how we might cultivate the discipline of not speaking. So we live in a particular time. We're in the season of COVID-19, and I don't know about you, but it seems like everyone is an expert on this particular virus. Isn't it interesting how everyone has something to say about it? Everyone knows something about it. Everyone has read an expert here or an expert there. And so we share our opinions, and sometimes we speak rather dogmatically about this. I'm also thinking of recent protests in the US, the Black Lives Matter. There you had people speaking, but you also had a lot of other people evaluating, everyone contributing to the conversation. And once again, we have this phenomenon of It seems everyone's an expert, everyone has an opinion, and sometimes these opinions are really dogmatic. I thought about this discipline of not speaking in terms of the Reformed confessions, whether the Reformed confessions ever celebrate silence. Well, in the Heidelberg Catechism, at least, the word silence or silent only occurs once, and there it is to discourage us from being silent. This is in connection with the Heidelberg Catechism's explanation of the third commandment. What is required in the third commandment is the question posed in Lord's Day 36. And it says, we are not to blaspheme or abuse the name of God by cursing or perjury or unnecessary oaths, nor to share in such horrible sins by being silent bystanders. So, there's definitely a time to speak. We must not be silent bystanders when we see the name of God blasphemed. At the same time, there is also a time to be silent, a time not to speak. And I want us, for the remainder of the time, to think about this in terms of these two passages. First of all, Proverbs 10, verse 19, where in the NIV it says, sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues. Sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues. In the New American Standard Bible, here's what we read. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable. If we go to the New Testament, we might think of the letter of James, where in chapter 1, verse 19, we read, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Now, I think we are accustomed, especially if we're familiar with church culture, to hearing the first part of this verse. Everyone must be slow to speak and quick to listen, but we might not have reflected sufficiently on that little phrase, slow to become angry. How does anger relate to speaking? Well, I think that anger is often fed by speaking. Anger, in some ways, depends on speaking. And when a person's tongue is moving rapidly, it's a signal that anger is not too far away. How do you feel when you sense that you are not being heard? Well, the emotion that people have when they sense that they're not being heard is anger. So be slow to speak and quick to listen. Well, what now is the value of not speaking? Well, not speaking gives us time to consider what we're saying and to consider when we should say it. And we need that time. It's often those spontaneous, automatic responses that we give that can be so hurtful. Not speaking gives us time to consider our words, to control what we say and when we say it. So not speaking really helps us communicate better, because to communicate well with the person, we need to listen. And in order to listen, we can't be speaking. I wonder what you think of people who aren't interested in what you have to say. I wonder what you think of people who always monopolize their conversations with you. Doesn't it suggest that they're not really interested in you? They don't really value your viewpoint? To communicate well, we need to listen, and that means we should not speak. But not speaking also helps us relinquish control. Sometimes we speak a lot in a conversation or a debate because we want to secure a particular outcome. I had this very experience only a few months ago. I was around a table with some other pastors and we were debating a particular issue, and I wanted us at this table to come to the right conclusion. And so I found myself talking a lot. to control the conversation and bring it to the outcome that I wanted. And in hindsight, I was not respectful of other people. I did not dignify other people. I was not attentive to the perspectives, the viewpoints, the positions of other people. Miguel de Unamuno is a philosopher, and he has this line. Listen to this. We need to pay less attention to what people are trying to tell us and more to what they tell us without trying. We need to pay less attention to what people are trying to tell us and more to what they tell us without trying. Well, three things as we conclude. Three situations, occasions when not speaking is especially appropriate. First of all, not speaking is appropriate in response to suffering, in response to those who are suffering. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Job. Job suffered immensely. All of his possessions were taken from him. His children perished. He became quite ill with boils on his skin. And his friends, did not respond well to Job's suffering. They talked too much, and they blamed Job's suffering on his impiety and disobedience. But here's what it says in Job 2. When they, his friends, saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. That was the only virtuous thing, it seems, that his friends did. Later on they would speak, and when they spoke, they misspoke. But for 7 days, the text says, and 7 nights, no one said a word to him. That's an appropriate response to suffering in some instances. I did a summer placement years ago in a congregation in Alberta, and I spoke with parents who lost a young child whose 7-year-old boy passed away the year before I arrived. And I asked them on one occasion, what was it that people said that you found especially meaningful as you grieved? And they said it wasn't anything that people said. It was when they were silent, but simply put their arms around them and indicated solidarity and care. So not speaking is often an appropriate response to suffering. Not speaking is also an appropriate response to those who are stubborn. Sometimes we get into arguments with people and we discover that the people with whom we are arguing are not open-minded, they're not receptive to having their minds changed. And it becomes a waste of time for us to persist in the debate. And Jesus talks about this in the Gospel of Matthew. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. It's not worth it to give something valuable to those who are not receptive to receiving it. And interestingly, if you read through the book of Acts, you discover at least 3 instances where Paul and the other apostles decide to move on and go somewhere else because they've met up with audiences that are not receptive. Well, then lastly, not speaking is an appropriate part of evangelism. Now, when we think of evangelism, we think of telling people the gospel, and I think that's what evangelism is chiefly. And yet I sometimes wonder if you agree, I sometimes wonder if we do too much talking and not enough listening. What do we say to people when we monopolize conversations? What do we say to people when we're not interested in hearing their position? We're saying to them, we don't care. You're not important to us. Your position isn't important. The way you live isn't important for us. And that's a very bad approach to evangelism. And we know this in part from Scripture, because Peter says in 1 Peter 3, wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. People can be won over without words. Our character sometimes says so much more than the words we might speak. And then lastly, I think this point is underscored and funded by 1 Peter 3:15 as well. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. This presupposes that you're living in such a way that people are being provoked to ask questions. And Peter says, when they ask those questions, be prepared to answer. But win them without words so that they can come to you and ask you for those words. I said a moment ago that the Reformed confessions, the Heidelberg Catechism in particular, nowhere seems to highlight the discipline of not speaking. But I think we have it to some degree in Lord's Day 32, question and answer 86 of the Heidelberg Catechism. And with this, we will conclude. Why must we do good works is part of the question. And the last part of the answer is this, that by our godly walk of life, we may win our neighbors for Christ. I wonder if you can join me in trying to cultivate in our lives the occasional discipline of not speaking. Thank you for joining us for this service, and we'll see you again in a week.